cold-hearted millionaire falling for the boldest intern ever. Sounds a little off, doesn't it? A man who never believed in love, who seemed untouchable, ends up falling for a small but fiercely stubborn and honest girl. What really happened between them, and how could a single encounter be enough to shatter the ice wall he'd spent years building? Before we dive into the story, we'd love to know a little bit about you. Where in the world are you listening from? When do you usually enjoy love stories like this? While working, driving, or just relaxing? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your amazing stories too. Now, what really happened between a cold-hearted millionaire and the intern who dared to challenge every limit? Damon Reed is known as a living legend in the women's fashion industry, but not for romance or any kind of glitzy spotlight. The man behind the luxury lingerie brand Velour Intimates is famous for being so cold he could freeze every room he walks into. At 32, Damon runs a billion-dollar empire with ironclad rules. No emotions, no spontaneity, no compromises. To him, everything is measured in data and strategy, even the softest-looking collections. There was a time during an internal meeting when the creative director suggested adding more emotion to a campaign. Damon responded coldly, "Emotion doesn't sell, brand positioning does." That line echoed through the headquarters like an unspoken law. Employees often whisper to each other that if you want to survive under Damon, you'd better not crack jokes or share personal stories. He can't stand what he calls time-wasting nonsense, his exact words during last year's all-hands meeting. Damon's appearance is as sharp as his demeanor. A perfectly tailored gray suit, a slim Patek Philippe on his wrist, and steely eyes that catch every flaw in the room. In the lingerie world, where softness and allure are the standard, Damon is like a razor-thin scratch of metal across silk. Ironically, the man behind a lingerie brand adored by women worldwide is often described with words like emotionless, untouchable, and a walking Swiss watch. At a launch event for a new collection, a bold female reporter once asked if he'd ever felt a spark for any of his models. Damon gave a faint, icy smile. "I get more excited over Q4 revenue reports." Outsiders think it's just a cold businessman persona. But anyone who's dealt with Damon firsthand knows, for him, control isn't just a management style. It's survival. Years ago, a brief scandal with an investor nearly cost him his entire career. Since then, Damon has built concrete walls no one can break through. No more lavish parties, no more casual flirting. Just Damon and business plans scheduled down to the minute. Under Damon's leadership, Velour Intimates isn't just a brand. It's a money-making machine, where every lace detail, every cut serves one ultimate goal: domination of the luxury lingerie market. Damon doesn't design for dreams. He designs for control. A twisted paradox no one dares to point out, at least not until the new intern shows up. In the minimalist office at the top floor of Velour's headquarters, Damon is intently reviewing the data from the latest ad campaign. Behind him, a glass wall reveals the city stretching out under a gray sky. Just then, his assistant knocks, voice cautious. "Mr. Reed, the new intern has arrived." Damon doesn't look up. "Have her take the competency test. Send it directly to me." "Sir, she's right outside the door, and it seems she's not leaving." Damon paused. It was rare for anyone to defy the procedures he put in place. He set his pen down on the desk and glanced at the office door, which was gently rattling from a soft, persistent knock. With a barely visible frown, he exhaled quietly. "Let her in," he said, his voice low and cold as ever. The door opened and Ella Brooks walked in. Hair loosely tied, round glasses slipping slightly down her nose, arms wrapped around a thick stack of documents. Unlike the stiff, nervous interns Damon was used to, Ella looked like she wasn't afraid of anything. Her eyes swept around the room, then landed on Damon. A breath, almost playful, slipped past her lips before Ella walked straight up to his desk and held out a folder. "This is a voluntary competency test," she said, voice calm and casual. "If you need more, I've got my portfolio on my phone, and if you're planning to size me up by a spreadsheet alone, then maybe I'm in the wrong company." Damon raised one eyebrow, a rare reaction from someone usually still as stone. Ella Brooks. The first girl to look Damon Reed, CEO of Velour Intimates, dead in the eye, and challenge him. In that moment, Damon had no idea he'd just opened the door to a storm he never saw coming. A storm named Ella. After that brief moment, Ella handing over her file, tossing out her bold declaration, the room fell silent, save for the soft wind tapping against the glass behind them. Damon, unreadable as ever, didn't reject her outright. Instead, he opened the folder, his icy gaze scanning each line. "You start next week," he said with a nod, voice sharp as a blade. "Unpaid internship. You work alone. You take full responsibility. No one's picking you up if you fall." Ella didn't need another invitation. She smiled faintly, nodded, and walked out of the office without hesitation, leaving behind a thick, heavy silence in her wake. But just before stepping fully through the doorway, she turned back, a mischievous glint in her eyes as they flicked toward Damon. "Oh, and if you ever need someone to check for emotional deficiency in your designs," she said, half joking, half serious, "I volunteer. No charge." Damon raised an eyebrow, just slightly, a gesture so small most people would miss it. But for someone like him, it was practically a headline. As per the intern onboarding protocol, Ella spent that morning touring different departments across the company. She walked past long hallways lined with posters of Velour's iconic lingerie collections, each image flawlessly edited. But to Ella's sharp eye, they all lacked one thing: life. As she passed by an open meeting room, Ella stopped in her tracks. Inside, Damon Reed was leading a design review meeting. A massive mood board stood at the front, covered in concept samples for the upcoming lingerie campaign. Delicate lace, flawless silhouettes, but not a shred of emotion. Ella stood behind the slightly cracked door, planning to watch for just a minute, until Damon's voice pulled her in deeper. "Looks good," he said coldly, "but we're not selling a collection, we're selling control." A wave of frustration rose in Ella's chest. She knew she shouldn't interfere. It was her first day. She should stay quiet, observe, adapt. But that stubborn streak, it flared. Without thinking, Ella nudged the door open and stepped inside. "Sorry," she said calmly, her voice slicing through the room and freezing it mid-breath. "But maybe if the boss smiled once in a while, our designs wouldn't feel so painfully serious." Silence. Then, as if on cue, every head in the room turned to Damon, like they were bracing for an explosion. Damon looked up, his icy gray eyes locking onto Ella. 1, 2, 3 seconds passed. No one dared to breathe. But instead of snapping, Damon just stared at her. Then the corner of his mouth lifted, just slightly. So faint it seemed like even he didn't notice. The Iceman, Damon Reed, had just laughed. Barely. But enough to leave every shareholder in that room stunned into silence. "And you think you're qualified to critique how we operate here?" Damon asked. Not exactly cold, but low and laced with something that sounded almost like interest. Ella shrugged, eyes clear, unflinching. "I'm not critiquing," she said. "I'm just saying what every potential customer would feel, but wouldn't dare to say out loud." A long silence followed. You could have heard a pin drop. Damon leaned forward, elbows on the table, studying her like he was deciding whether to throw her out of the building or pull her into the inner circle. Finally, he gave a small nod. "Leave the room," he said, voice flat. "And next time, if you have feedback, at least wait until you're invited." Ella smiled, dipped her head in a playful little bow, and turned to walk out of the room. As the door clicked shut behind her, one of the marketing directors let out a breath and whispered, "She's crazy. That girl's actually crazy." But Damon didn't think so. He sat still, staring at the empty space where Ella had just stood. And in his gray eyes, for the first time in years, there was the faintest flicker of something. Something almost like curiosity. Ella officially started her internship the Monday after that fateful meeting. At first, everything seemed to go smoothly. She was hardworking, always on time, and unafraid to ask anyone about how things worked. But it took just 3 days for Ella to start making waves. That morning, while the marketing team was racking their brains for fresh ideas for the fall-winter campaign, Ella suddenly raised her hand. Every eye in the room snapped to her. The new intern, daring to jump into a strategic meeting. Ella stood up, one hand on her hip, eyes gleaming with mischief. "Instead of hiring a famous model," she said, "why don't we have CEO Reed be the face of the campaign? Just picture it." A tagline like, "If he believes in velour, why don't you?" Instant media storm. The room went dead silent. A few people coughed. One mid-level manager nearly spilled his coffee. Damon's personal assistant, taking notes nearby, turned pale. staring at Ella like she'd just suggested blowing up headquarters. At the head of the table, Damon silently set his pen down. He rested his elbows on the desk, fingers laced, and looked at Ella with a mix of disbelief and something almost like amusement. "You just suggested I pose in women's lingerie?" he asked, voice calm and flat. Ella winked and nodded, completely unfazed. "Not necessarily lingerie, just a suit, with the lace trim from the new collection peeking through. The idea is to break the stereotype. Sexy but powerful. You'd be the face of living authentically from the inside out." No one laughed. No one even breathed. After 3 long seconds, Damon simply motioned to end the meeting. Cold, controlled, classic Damon. "The idea is noted," Damon said, his tone so calm it gave nothing away, "but I won't approve any imagery that might ruin a customer's appetite at dinner." Ella smiled, like she knew she'd just planted a small bomb in the mind of the coldest CEO in the industry. And that wasn't the end of it. Later that afternoon, while teams across departments rushed to finalize the campaign materials, Ella was assigned one last task: the final check on all marketing collateral. No one expected that within just an hour, Ella had taken it upon herself to rewrite the company's slogan. The original, officially approved tagline, "Velour Intimates, Elegance Underneath," became "Velour Intimates, not just for looks, for living boldly inside out." When the communications team accidentally published the edited version on the official channels, social media lit up. The post was shared thousands of times within hours, flooded with comments praising it as bold, real, and magnetic. But inside the company, an emergency meeting was called immediately. Damon Reed walked into the boardroom, his gray suit flawless, not a wrinkle in sight, eyes cold as a frozen lake. He glanced down at the report on the table, where the bold new tagline practically screamed off the page. Every department head sat in dead silence, eyes darting nervously between Damon and Ella. The intern sitting upright, completely unfazed, like the ceiling could cave in and it still wouldn't be her problem. "Explain," Damon ordered. "Just one word." Ella shrugged, eyes lit with conviction. "We're not just selling appearances. We're selling emotion. We're selling inner freedom." The old slogan was nice, sure, but it was too polite. Women today want more than nice. They want to live boldly, from the inside out. A creative director, voice trembling, muttered, "The campaign is actually trending on Twitter right now." Damon folded his arms, leaned back in his chair, and stared at Ella for a long moment. Then, as if something inside him finally snapped, he leaned forward and asked coldly, "How does a man selling confidence in lace look so scared of it?" The room froze. Ella smiled, standing her ground. "Maybe because living it is harder than selling it," she replied, eyes steady, unwavering. A second later, to the shock of every exec in the room, Damon laughed, a real laugh. Not polite, not forced. It was short, but honest. Almost defeated. No one could believe what they were seeing. The man who never lost control, who never allowed a flicker of vulnerability in front of his staff, now sat there, head bowed slightly into his hand, laughing with quiet resignation. Ella, still standing tall, arms crossed, watched him with a smile that was equal parts triumphant and strangely innocent. Damon Reed, the ironclad CEO, for the first time in years, wasn't fully in control. And he realized, maybe for the first time in his life, he didn't hate the feeling. A week after the meeting that forced Damon into an unintentional laugh, Ella was still stirring things up across every department at Velour Intimates. She hadn't changed, still bold, still sharp, still charging straight into boundaries most people tiptoed around. Damon, outwardly as composed and icy as ever, had started watching Ella more than he should. He never said her name aloud, but his gaze always lingered a beat longer whenever she passed by. One late afternoon, as the offices were winding down, Damon happened to walk past the workstations and spotted Ella, hunched over, tidying up some documents. But what caught his attention wasn't that she was still there. It was the hushed phone call she was whispering behind her desk. "Be good, Jaden. I promise I'll come home early this weekend. Did you finish your porridge? You have to eat all of it, okay? I left some money in your desk drawer. Don't forget." Damon stood behind a pillar, not intending to eavesdrop, but Ella's quiet words slipped through the space like threads pulling at something in him. Her voice was so gentle, it made the noise of the outside world feel distant. When the call ended, Ella sighed, and her small shoulders sagged for just a moment. That fleeting softness was quickly masked by her usual composed calm as she turned back to her work. Damon walked away without a word. But from that moment on, he couldn't get Ella out of his mind. That night, while reviewing intern personnel files, Damon instructed his assistant to do a deeper background check on Ella Brooks. He didn't like making decisions based on emotion. But this time, even he couldn't explain why he needed to know more. The report that came back made him pause. Ella, 22, had just graduated with a full scholarship in fashion design. Her parents had died in a car accident. Since then, she'd been raising her 10-year-old brother, Jaden Brooks, on her own, a boy born with brittle bone disease. Jaden's condition meant even the smallest bump could lead to a fracture, forcing Ella to juggle multiple jobs to cover hospital bills and daily expenses. Damon read the summary over and over, his gaze darkening. The girl who held her head high in every meeting was, in reality, carrying an entire world on her narrow shoulders. And what struck him hardest, Ella had turned down several higher-paying jobs to take an unpaid internship at Velour, simply because she wanted real experience in the fashion industry, where she believed her passion might finally have a place. Not for the money, not for the prestige, just for a dream she couldn't let go. The next morning, Damon had a meeting with the creative team about the upcoming collection. Ella was there, quietly sitting in the corner of the room. Just like always, Damon could barely focus on the presentation. His eyes kept drifting to Ella, quietly taking notes, legs neatly crossed, hair pulled into a loose bun at the nape of her neck. He found himself wondering, how does she still smile like that, when the world outside seems to have crushed every bit of hope she had? Part of him wanted to do something. The other part, the colder, more practiced part, reminded him firmly, no attachments, no emotional ties, no sympathy, no repeating the mistakes that nearly cost him everything years ago. Under the table, Damon's hand clenched slightly, his gaze shifted back, distant, sharp, and cold once again. But when Ella looked up, her eyes accidentally meeting his, Damon knew the wall he had spent years building was starting to crack. And no amount of logic could stop those fractures from spreading. One afternoon, by chance, he saw her sketching designs during her lunch break by the window. Damon watched from a distance. She had no idea he was there. The soft afternoon light poured through the glass, catching in her hair, wrapping her in a faint, golden glow. Ella leaned in, fully absorbed in her lines, lips pressed together in quiet focus. Damon felt something tighten in his chest. She wasn't glamorous. No jewelry, no bold lipstick, no high-fashion drama. But she had something every luxury collection out there was missing: soul. And for the first time in years, Damon wasn't sure if he could keep his heart out of this. 1 week after discovering Ella's hidden reality, Damon Reed began breaking his own rigid rules. No official announcement was made, but those close to the executive floor noticed quickly. Intern Ella Brooks was suddenly present in meetings that even senior marketing heads sometimes didn't get invited to. Then came the shocker. Damon assigned Ella a major task: to co-lead the creative planning for Velour's newest lingerie launch campaign. This campaign couldn't just look good, it had to feel something. It had to break the mold. On the first day of brainstorming, the room felt stiff. The senior executives kept their distance, wary of the young newcomer who hadn't even been with the company a full month. But Ella was unfazed. She didn't shrink or hesitate. She walked straight to the whiteboard, grabbed a marker, and lit it up with ideas like fireworks. "Have we ever thought about letting women tell their own stories?" she asked, turning to face the room. Not professional models, real women, with scars, fears, and dreams of their own. Some frowned, others took notes. Damon sat at the head of the table, eyes locked on Ella. He didn't interrupt, didn't correct. He let her lead, completely disrupting the usual rhythm of their tightly controlled strategy meetings. The room came alive. What started as cautious silence turned into a heated discussion. Department heads who had been distant were now leaning in, pulled into the current of Ella's energy. Everyone had something to say, and Ella responded to each point, guiding, challenging, or spinning it into something new. And amid the exchange of ideas, more and more glances passed between Ella and Damon. Quick, wordless, almost invisible to anyone else, but heavy with something unspoken. Damon noticed it. and he hated that he noticed it. In the middle of a heated debate about campaign naming, Ella suddenly turned and looked Damon straight in the eye, that familiar spark of mischief dancing there. "You know," she said casually, her voice cutting clean through the room, "you design dreams, but live like a nightmare. Kinda ironic, huh?" The room froze. Everyone held their breath. Damon's hand tightened slightly on the table. For a split second, heat shot to his temples. The kind of pressure that usually triggered one of his infamous shutdowns. But this time, something different happened. No sharp retort, no smug smirk, no cold dismissal, just silence. Silence, and a truth Damon could no longer deny was knocking on the door of his guarded heart. He was in love. He was in love with the stubborn, reckless, fiercely passionate girl across the table. Not the kind of love that could be dissected, quantified, or folded neatly into a business model, but the kind that slipped past every defense, shattered every rule, and refused to be contained. Damon told himself he had to keep his distance, had to extinguish the spark before it caught fire, had to protect the cold, calculated world that had kept him alive for so many years. But as Ella turned away and seamlessly continued guiding the room with her unstoppable ideas, Damon knew this battle was lost the moment it began. And worse, he didn't want to win it. His heart, the part he'd locked up and buried deep, was unsealing itself. All because of a girl who didn't even know she was holding the key. The rumors started spreading like wildfire that Thursday morning, just days after the brainstorming session where Damon had lost his grip. A mid-level employee, unable to hide the bitterness over Ella's fast track into high-level projects, began whispering to others, "She's seducing the boss. No one gets that kind of access just on talent alone." One sentence was all it took. Whispers began circulating the entire floor. The rumor seeped into every coffee break conversation, laced itself into every sideways glance that followed Ella down the hallway. Ella knew. She wasn't naive. The stares, the not-so-subtle head shakes, the pointed whispers made just loud enough for her to hear, each one like a tiny needle driving into. But this time, he cut her off cold. "Let's not complicate things," he said, voice flat and mechanical. "Focus on the tasks you've been assigned. No one asked you to be creative." Silence dropped over the room like a hammer. Ella froze, stunned. Her face flushed as if she'd just been slapped. Her eyes widened, trying to process what had just happened. Damon, the man who had once urged her to push boundaries, who had laughed with her, had just dismissed everything she brought to the table in one ice-cold sentence. She clenched the stack of papers in her hands, fighting to keep her lips from trembling. The meeting ended. People rushed to gather their things, avoiding her gaze like she was a virus. Ella walked straight out without looking back. Her steps were calm, but her chest felt like it was collapsing inward. That evening, she packed her things in silence. No one stopped her. No goodbyes. Not even a sympathetic glance. Damon walked in just as she was slipping the last folder into her bag. He stood there, flawless in his gray suit, eyes as cold and unreadable as if nothing had happened that morning. Ella looked up and met his gaze. No blame, no pleading, just a tired, hollow stare. "Don't worry," she said, voice soft as breath but every word sharp as a blade. "I won't stain your perfect record with my imperfect existence." Damon couldn't speak. Not a word. Ella walked past him. Her arm brushed the sleeve of his suit, cold as winter air. And as the door closed behind her, Damon stood there, still, silent, frozen. Part of him screamed to go after her, to stop her, to say he believed in her. But the hardened part, the rational, fear-driven part, still haunted by past mistakes, kept him frozen in place. And in that moment, Damon Reed realized he had just let go of the one person who made his heart feel alive. All because of a moment of doubt. A moment he would pay for the rest of his life. 3 days after Ella walked out of Velour, the company kept moving. Meetings still happened. Campaigns were still planned. Reports still landed in Damon's inbox, timed to the minute. Everything seemed unchanged. Only Damon knew. A quiet emptiness had opened inside him, slow and steady, eating at him hour by hour, day by day. At first, he tried to drown it out with work, like always. But Ella's eyes, her final words, kept echoing. A small wound that refused to heal. One late night, while reviewing personnel files, Damon's eyes paused on a section. Velour Talent Grant Program. a special initiative he had launched 3 years ago to support gifted fashion students. Without thinking, he typed her name into the system. Ella Brooks. The results appeared almost instantly. Ella had been one of the few students selected this year, chosen purely for her exceptional academic record and outstanding creative portfolio. The selection committee had described her application as the most impressive among this year's candidates, based solely on merit. No favors, no connections, no manipulation. Damon sat motionless in front of the screen, his hands frozen on the desk. No games, no schemes, no seduction to climb the ladder. Ella had earned her place at Velour with nothing but raw talent and a pure, relentless drive, and he, Damon Reed, had betrayed that trust with the coldest kind of doubt. A slow, heavy ache twisted in his chest. He replayed everything in his mind, the way Ella's eyes lit up when she spoke about a new idea, the soft smile she wore as she adjusted the tiniest details in her designs, the quiet dignity she held onto when facing whispers and judgment, head high, spine straight. All of it was real, and Damon had shattered the only trust she had given him. With his own hands. The next morning, Velour's new collection launch was held in the company's main auditorium. Every senior staff member was present. Reporters were already lined up outside. Damon wore his signature gray suit, his face expressionless, his eyes colder than usual. He stepped onto the stage, took the mic, and began the launch speech. Each new lingerie piece flashed across the massive screen behind him. Flawless cuts, rich fabrics, elegant palettes. Everything perfectly on brand, perfectly velour intimates. But as Damon's eyes scanned the designs, all he could see was an emptiness he couldn't name. No soul, no spark, no Ella. A faint wave of dizziness passed over him, but he held steady, voice unwavering, pushing through the speech like nothing was wrong. He wrapped up exactly on script and stepped off the stage to familiar applause. But every step felt heavy, like his shoes were filled with stone. He didn't return to his office right away. Instead, Damon wandered through the main hall, the space lined with Velour's signature designs from over the years. He stopped in front of one sketch, Ella's first. The one she had quietly revised during a quiet afternoon, pouring herself into it when no one was watching. He had barely glanced at it back then, never realizing what it truly held. Now, it sat behind glass in a modest corner of the display. A simple design, understated, but radiating a kind of warmth no luxury collection had ever managed to capture. Damon stood there for a long time, hands at his sides, eyes heavy with something too deep to name. He wondered, how long had it been since he let emotion lead instead of logic? How long since he trusted someone, truly trusted with his whole heart? Ella had offered him that chance. A rare, fragile moment of openness, and he'd crushed it beneath the weight of his own cold certainty. In the reflection off the display glass, Damon saw himself. The perfect suit, the frozen expression, the tired, distant eyes, a successful man, a model CEO, and a desperately lonely soul. That day, under the bright lights and over the roar of applause, Damon Reed understood more clearly than ever: success, money, power. None of it meant anything if he didn't have the courage to reach for what truly mattered when it stood right in front of him. And some mistakes, one single mistake, was enough to haunt a man for the rest of his life. Saturday afternoon. The city fell under a gentle rain. Damon Reed sat behind the wheel, driving straight toward the old neighborhood, just 15 minutes from the city center, but it felt like a world away. Slower, simpler, real. He wore a plain jacket, no tie, no suit, just Damon. Not the CEO of Velour, not the cold, untouchable figure the fashion world had. Damon didn't sit, he stood there facing her, no defenses left, no trace of the cold, controlled CEO the world knew. Just a man, holding his heart in plain view. "I don't have flowers," he said, voice rough. "No gifts, just one truth I should have told you a long time ago." Ella set her pen down. She didn't speak, didn't push him away, didn't pull him closer. Damon drew in a deep breath, like he was summoning every ounce of courage a man could carry. "You're the only design that ever scared me," he said, each word dropping like truth torn from the core of him. "And I don't want to live another day without you in it." Ella sat still for a long beat. Outside, the rain tapped steadily against the windows, a quiet rhythm underscoring the weight of the moment. Then, a single tear slipped down Ella's cheek, too fast for her to wipe away, and with it, a smile broke across her lips, trembling, radiant. Good, she whispered, her voice cracking through the grin. Because I don't do revisions. Damon exhaled, as if releasing an entire mountain that had been crushing his chest. He sat down across from her, his hand reaching gently for hers, soft, careful, like he was afraid the moment might shatter if he touched it wrong. Ella curled her fingers around his, just a small movement, but to Damon, it carried more weight than any contract he'd ever signed. No more words were needed. Love, the very thing he had once avoided, once labeled the greatest risk, now lived in the place that had been the driest, most barren corner of his heart. An hour passed and they were still there, sharing quiet stories, missed dreams, hidden fears, and in every glance, every smile, both of them knew. This time, they weren't letting go. Some encounters seem accidental, but they can shift the course of an entire life. Damon Reed, the man who once believed his heart had long since died, had finally found a reason to live honestly, to love fully, and to trust again. Because of one small, stubborn, fearless girl, Ella Brooks. Their love didn't begin with grand gestures or poetic words. It began with friction, with sharp exchanges, stubborn silence, and two people choosing over and over again to move toward each other when every instinct said to run. The greatest lesson here wasn't that love conquers all. It was this: to love with courage is the greatest victory a person can achieve. Because sometimes strength isn't about being fearless. It's about opening your heart despite the fear. It's about forgiving and daring to trust again, even after betrayal, even after the hurt. What about you? Have you ever met someone who made your cold, guarded world start to melt? Do you have the courage to give yourself and that person a real chance, even if it all starts with messy, awkward beginnings? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear what's on your heart. And don't forget to subscribe to Love Stories and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the love stories that go straight to the soul. See you in the next journey of love.